So, I'm here with Dr. Cicchirillo, and I'm very glad that we were able to set this up.
Yes.
And actually, could you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Okay. My name is Dr. Cicchirillo. I am a assistant professor here at University of Texas. I did my undergrad and master's at West Virginia University. I did my PhD at Ohio State, and then afterwards I graduated and got a job down here at UT.
Right.
My primary research or interest areas are sort of online media, in particular sort of video games and video game advertising and advert games. Within that, the context focusing on how sort of certain aspects of gameplay can affect levels of aggression as well as entertainment and enjoyment.
Right.
And well as part of it is also understanding the context in which the game takes place. So looking at features of character gender, character race, as well as the context in which the violence or the narrative take place to influence those post-gameplay outcomes.
Right. So the questions I want to ask you in this episode is kind of fanboyism, right? I mean, why do certain people gravitate so strongly towards one brand, right? So, I mean, why is it that during E3, people argue on end on forums like over which is better, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo? I mean, what is kind of the sociological aspects of that?
Well, part of it is we have to understand what we know about brands. Okay, so back in probably the 80s or 70s, brands were just like a way to identify a product or service.
Right.
Well, in the 80s, we came out with what was called spiritual branding or spiritual marketing. Okay, and what happened was it was taking those brands and instead of tying them to something people identify, tied them to higher order ideals. So tying Nike to levels of competition. Or because if you think about it, like look at like laundry detergent. It's laundry detergent, right? It all involves the same chemicals to get your clothes cleaner. But with branding, we can associate certain things with those, and with say athletic equipment, the same thing. Like Nike, Adidas, all those, they make athletic equipment. Right. But with branding, tying high order deals like competition and achievement and success, people become more strongly identify with them. We can see this in video game consoles and brands of video game contexts and all of those that people then became to identify with those, with Xbox, with Nintendo, with Sony PlayStation, as identifying who they are as basically, this is PlayStation 3 or PlayStation, like I like their games better, I like their controls better, I like it better than Xbox because of this reason. And part of that has to do with how those brands set themselves up apart from one another, what people identify with. I would argue that they all do the same thing. They're all entertainment venues. They're all entertainment hardware and software that people bring into their home.
Right.
But the brands, how they differentiate themselves, has really created, I think, what we call that fanboyism. Nintendo is a really interesting sort of brand in and of itself because you have sort of the retro Nintendo. Right. The old school, the box with the the cartridges, and the people still sort of adore the old school the controller that is basically people love that, have T-shirts with the controller on it and things that, and that retro aspect of Nintendo that people identify with. But then you have the newer Nintendo, which is the Wii, which is so much different from the old version of itself, and that's because of sort of technological advancements. But they've managed to kind of keep both sort of that retrofit and the new expansion of their brand of the new thing they're coming out with now is the Nintendo or the Wii U. And part of that is to try to sort of fight the tablet market. So what they're finding is that people are switching from the basic console systems to mobile gaming, gaming on their phone, to tablet gaming. And so they're losing out a huge market. And so to combat that, they came out with the Wii U, which basically has a tablet that goes with the console that can be part of the gaming experience. Right. So it's interesting to see how that's going. But in general, back to your previous question, is they create these brands with higher order ideals in mind, whether it be retro gaming or motion sensing technology of the Nintendo brand, and the Wii brand is basically social gaming. Like you can get together with your friends. It's not just for a sole person now, it's for everybody. It's gaming for the family, and that's the kind of brand that they've created that people identify with. And so it's all about the connection to the company.
So, I mean, one question I had to ask is, I felt that I was a really big hardcore Nintendo fan during the GameCube era, right? And I would argue on end, in middle school. Do you think it has anything to do with kind of adolescence, finding identity or associating yourself? Because right now, Like, I see a lot of kids fighting over Android versus Apple, right? Oh, you know, you guys are just... You know, it seems a little asinine, but do you think adolescence has anything to do with this?
Yes. I mean, I think definitely growing up, you know, people play certain types of games. You know, growing up, it was... With me, when I was growing up, it was all about which new gaming system you had. Right. And so we made the switch from Nintendo to the, you know, the Sega Genesis, because it was better, and so it was the big
blast processing,
yeah, and, you know, the newest thing that was coming out, and what, you know, oh, you don't have Sega anymore, now we have, you know, the PlayStation, and so for me, it really wasn't so much about sort of different brand connections, about basically what was the newest and best thing to have. And I think it was when you're an adolescent, that's one of the most important things. And so I think what you're referring to is now is, what if we have two things that are basically considered equal, like the Android or the iPhone, like somebody arguing that, well, mine does this, mine does that, right. You know, where people are sort of identifying with one or the other. So I think growing up, when you grow up with a brand, that definitely can form connections that we didn't necessarily have in the past, because it was always about each system outdoing one another. Right. Whereas now they're pretty much on par with each other, and so it's kind of, you know, different to see how adolescents adjust to that. But yeah, I mean, definitely that connection of growing up with a brand can create that identity of, like, this is who I am as a gamer. And I think when I was growing up, and it's changing now, but in generations past, it was, you know, boys play video games, girls don't. And so that was sort of that gender role stereotyping of, like, this is what boys do, girls don't do this now. But now we see changes because of online gaming, games being developed for more female audiences, is that those adolescent girls are just as willing to play games, as long as the content is more geared towards something that they find interesting. You know, it's not everybody likes first-person shooters, but we see those differences, and I think adolescence really develops individuals as gamers. And so, if you start earlier on, you're probably more likely to keep playing in the future than if you catch on. But people can still catch on later on in life, is what we're seeing with different types of games being developed for those different generations.
So, I mean, when I was a kid, right, my parents would only let me have one console, right? Do you think that has anything to do with kind of that fanboyism? I mean, you're stuck with either Sega or Nintendo or Microsoft or whatever. So, I mean, to what extent does just economics, you know, family economics play into, you know, why you gravitate yourself towards this?
Yeah, well, I think economics, like you said, it does factor into it, because as we can see, you know, these console systems aren't cheap.
No.
You know, they can be really expensive, each one ranging to $300 to $400 per system, and then the games themselves are anywhere from $50 to $60. Right. So yeah, economics plays a huge factor into it, and I mean, the gaming industry of itself is $1 billion industry. I mean, it is on par with what we think of now when we think of like a media-based industry, or like movies and things like that. And so, when they develop these games, there's a lot of money that goes into it. And when a game fails or a system fails, I mean, that can be the entire company. So economically, there's just huge factors, not just with families being able to afford one system, but largely that impacts the company, which impacts our, you know, economic system, you know, part of it, at least that product.